Tonight on Greater Boston, on the eve of the one-year anniversary of the Capitol insurrection, retired federal judge Nancy Gertner and former U.S. Attorney Michael Sullivan join me on whether a criminal prosecution is or should be in Donald Trump's future. Then later, how did a prestigious organization like Brigham Health end up gambling on a venture to build a hospital for elites in China, only to fail in spectacular fashion? And what does the whole thing say about the priorities of nonprofit healthcare institutions here in Massachusetts? Two Boston Globe reporters behind the story, they join me. As the nation gets ready to mark 1 year since the attack on the Capitol, Attorney General Merrick Garland gave an update of sorts on the criminal investigations into those involved.
Those involved must be held accountable. As of today, we have arrested and charged more than 725 defendants in nearly all 50 states and the District of Columbia for their roles in the January 6th attack. The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6th perpetrators at any level accountable under law, whether they were present that day or were otherwise criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy. We will follow the facts wherever they lead.
Many were waiting today to hear whether those facts might lead to charges against the former president, the man who many believe incited the violence that day, and then did nothing for hours as he watched it play out. But by the end of Garland's press conference, that question remained unanswered. And of course, the man himself seems largely unbothered by the possibility, having planned to mark tomorrow's anniversary with a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago hotel up until last night, when Donald Trump abruptly canceled the plan, reportedly only after several allies and Republican leaders repeatedly urged him to do so. True to form, though, he took a jab at the congressional committee investigating the attack in the process, saying in a statement, "In light of the total bias and dishonesty of the J6 Unselect Committee of Democrats, two failed Republicans, and the fake news media, I am canceling the January 6th press conference at Mar-a-Lago, and instead will discuss many of those important topics at my January 15th rally." Legal experts, and people with basic common sense, also thought the press conference was a bad idea, given the committee's ongoing investigation. And while the Attorney General still won't say whether he'll bring a case against Trump, the partner of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who suffered 2 strokes and died after the attack, has already reached a verdict.
I think he needs to be in prison. That's what I think. I hold Donald Trump 100% responsible for what happened on January 6th.
And she's not the only one. Just yesterday, some D.C. and Capitol police officers filed 2 new civil lawsuits against Trump for provoking the attack, just the latest in a long list of suits by fellow officers and lawmakers. The D.C. Attorney General is also conducting a criminal incitement investigation into Trump's role in the insurrection, and those are just the cases related to January 6th. New York State Attorney General Letitia James confirmed this week that her office has subpoenaed some of Trump's children in a civil investigation into the family's business practices and is looking to question the former president as well. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is conducting a criminal investigation into the same issue. And Trump is the subject of additional criminal probes into attempted election interference in Georgia. And then there are the other civil suits pending against the former president, including those of his former aide Michael Cohen, his niece Mary Trump, and the NAACP, to name just a few. But for a man who's been investigated and sued plenty of times before and has always somehow found his way out of trouble, will this time be any different? I'm joined now by Nancy Gertner. She's a retired federal judge, senior lecturer at Harvard Law School, and former U.S. Attorney Michael Sullivan, who was appointed by George W. Bush, successfully prosecuted the shoe bomber, worked with former special counsel Robert Mueller at the DOJ, and is now a partner with the Ashcroft Group. Happy New Year to both of you. Good to see you as well. Thanks so much for being here.
New Year.
Thanks, Jim. Happy New Year.
And to you. Judge Gertner, starting with you, what was your reaction to what Attorney General Garland had to say? Is that all he could say?
That's all he should say. Let me put it that way. Not could. He certainly could have said more in the way that, Bill Barr did and in the way Sessions did. but that actually would be inconsistent with what the Department of Justice is supposed to do. So, well, this is all he should say, which is just, we're going to follow this wherever it goes. But there's really, it's not just a focus on January 6th and who is responsible for it. There are other questions that are raised about Trump's activities and others' activities with respect to Georgia and the Electoral College. In other words, it's not just the demonstration or the whatever that was the insurrection on January 6th. It's also what else was being done to set aside a lawful election. And so to some degree, his remarks were actually narrow. We'll follow January 6th wherever it goes. What about the broader questions of trying to trying to change who's at the top of the Department of Justice, interfere in Georgia? Those are questions that they should be investigating as well.
Judge, can I just stay with you for 1 second? Is it possible there is an investigation ongoing or even a grand jury convene and there wouldn't be leaks that we would know about it, meaning into Donald Trump's involvement?
Is it possible? I suppose it's possible in an attorney general's office in which he is absolutely adamant about there being no leaks. On the other hand, so is Bob Mueller, and things leaked out. So it's possible.
But unlikely.
But unlikely, yeah.
Michael Sullivan, did Garland say all that an attorney general can say at this stage of things?
I agree with Judge Gertner. I think that's all he should have said. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you investigate and prosecute somebody publicly, they've lost the presumption of innocence. And that's the reason why I think most prosecutors and investigators conduct these types of matters in secret, behind closed doors. Yeah. And I think judges get extremely offended, particularly when prosecutors try to use the public media for the purposes of enhancing their case, whether it's former President Donald Trump or a housekeeper. Everyone should have the presumption of innocence. And the fact of the matter is, President Trump has a presumption of guilt right now because of all the negative media stories about him, including all the leaked investigations. I think it's horrible, that state and federal prosecutors have leaked information about investigations.
Well, Michael Sullivan, I'm sure you saw the Washington Post poll. What most people are focused on is the percentage of Americans who think violence against their government may be appropriate. But I want to turn to another piece. 60% of all adults thought that the president bore a great deal or a good amount of responsibility for the Capitol attack. And yesterday on television, I heard Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General, say the U.S. Attorney Manual, which I'm sure you're familiar with, says it is appropriate to announce an investigation when public confidence requires it. Is this not such a situation?
It is absolutely not such a situation. But that horse has already left the barn. Based on everything that's been said, both at the executive level and at the congressional level. I mean, the whole purpose of this select committee in the House is to investigate the former president.
And that's wrong?
So, I'm sorry, what's that again, Judge?
What's wrong with that?
Well, I think you let the Department of Justice conduct whatever investigation they think is appropriate to see whether or not there's a crime. What's wrong with it is it's clearly political in nature in terms of what's going on in the Congress. I think the majority of people recognize what the Select Committee is doing in Congress is motivated by politics and far less by facts. And when you have a Department of Justice that's more than capable of conducting this type of investigation, and you would hope they would conduct it without any political influence, they could get to the bottom of the story. The fact that somebody might be responsible for the events doesn't make somebody responsible from a criminal perspective.
No, but that's just a point. The Select Committee is composed as it is because the Republicans refused to participate. They could have treated January 6th like the 9/11 Commission, which is let's get to the bottom of it, all of us. It was bad no matter what side of the aisle you're on. The other thing is that it's exactly because the Department of Justice is looking only at crime. And crime is a much more narrow subcategory of what may or may not have happened, whereas the Select Committee is looking for responsibility. And that may be criminal responsibility. It may just be being responsible in other respects. So no, I think that that's just as the 9/11 Commission wasn't designed necessarily to indict anyone. They wanted to understand what intelligence failures, what political failures, what failures on all sorts of levels led to that. And that's a broader charge than the Department of Justice.
And even if they make a criminal referral, I should say, what's that again?
I'm sorry, Jim, I said the only additional points. First off, the committee was chosen by the Democratic Speaker of the House.
Because the Republicans wouldn't participate.
Well, that's not, Judge, in all due respect, I'm not sure that's factually accurate because the two members that were recommended by the minority leader of the House were rejected by the Speaker.
And we've now found that those two members may well have been involved.
If I can, I want to move on. If I may, gentleman, lady, can I move beyond this? I want to get to the criminal issue that the committee may not deal with. There may be no referral. Michael Sullivan, starting with you, based on what you know around January 6th, whether it's incitement, aiding and abetting, did Donald Trump commit a crime, or should he at least be investigated based upon the facts that you're aware of?
I see no evidence to suggest that the former president committed the crime by participating in a rally, a demonstration. We should embrace the right of people to demonstrate, even if we don't agree with the message. Having said that, I don't think you should be investigating a person. You should be investigating the events. You know, the fact that some people breached the Capitol is a crime, as it turns out, and people are being investigated and charged with that. If there are others,
hundreds of them,
that are complicit, if there are hundreds, if there are others that are complicit, and if there's evidence that have committed the crime, I think the vast majority of Americans, Republican and Democrat alike, would say that they should be charged.
Michael Sullivan, you don't think, if I may, well, let me just ask you, you don't think that he was involved in a conspiracy to overthrow an election, whether it was the call that we've all heard, his voice telling the Secretary of State in Georgia to go find 11,000 plus votes that didn't exist, or his conversations with Jeffrey Clark and the Justice Department about setting this thing up for example, for Georgia's results to be overturned? That doesn't fall within the anti-sedition statute from your perspective?
I don't think so, Jim. The fact that somebody doesn't agree with the election results because they believe that some ballots either weren't counted or were destroyed, or some people voted that shouldn't vote, and express those feelings should never be a crime. Whether you and I disagree with the person's premise, the person has a right to at least object, to the election results. And if he believes...
Let me get Judge Gertner back in this if I can. I understand. Judge Gertner, do you think crimes are committed based upon what you know around January 6th by the president?
I think crimes should be investigated. I don't think that there's any question that crime should be investigated. The question is, I appreciate if someone can be, you can incite a crowd, and that sort of borders on the rights of the president, his First Amendment rights. But the question is, that was in tandem with trying to replace the top of the Department of Justice to get someone in who would declare the election invalid. That would then lead, putting pressure on Pence to then force the election into the state legislature, whereas Trump was likely to win. In addition, Just Security last week had an interesting report about whether Trump was happy with the chaos in the Capitol because he was on the verge of declaring a state of emergency and stopping the count. And whether those things can be proved, I don't know. But whether they should be investigated, without a doubt.
Judge Gertner, one more question about possible crimes. I want to play for you what Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Cheney, a Republican member of the committee, had to say on ABC on Sunday. Here she is.
He was sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office watching the attack on television. as the assault on the Capitol occurred. He could have told them to stand down. He could have told them to go home, and he failed to do so. It's hard to imagine a more significant, a more serious dereliction of duty than that.
Is inaction ever a crime, Judge Gertner?
Not usually, no. Inaction is only a crime if you have an obligation, a duty to act. And I actually think that of all the grounds for considering what Trump did or didn't do, that is the weakest ground. That perhaps in tandem with evidence that he was happy with the chaos in the Capitol because, as many military leaders were saying, he wanted to declare a state of emergency. There's an interesting story about why the National Guard was not called up as quickly very quickly at all. And one story is that they were afraid that if there was a federal presence on the Capitol steps that day, that Trump would turn that into essentially argue that there was a state of emergency. The federal troops should then, as he said, protect the demonstrators rather than protect the Capitol. There's enough swirling around here that is very troubling, that is totally out of the ordinary, that ought to be investigated.
Before we go, can I just change gears a drop, Michael Sullivan, with you? You were one of 3 former U.S. attorneys, Bud, Weld, and you, who endorsed the nomination of Rachel Rollins for U.S. attorney. She'll be sworn in Monday. She'll be with me Monday night. What's your reaction to none of your fellow Republicans in the Senate thinking that Rachel Rollins was fit to serve in that capacity?
Disappointed, certainly. As I've said publicly and I've shared privately, I think Rachel Rollins is eminently qualified to serve as United States Attorney. I'm confident she's going to do an extraordinary job as U.S. Attorney. So disappointed.
I asked Ed Markey if he thought racism was involved in that vote, and he said 100%. Do you?
I absolutely do not. I don't see any indication at all that was based on race. I think, unfortunately, Rachel Rollins turned into a political event, and some people looked at some of the positions she's taken as a district attorney, and I think used it for political purposes. I don't believe it to be a race. I hope it was not race.
Michael Sullivan, Nancy Gertner, as always, thank you both. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As just about everyone knows, there are a lot of issues with the U.S. healthcare system. It's expensive, it's complicated, and when it comes to the best of the best nonprofit providers, like many here in Boston, you'd like to think they're focusing all their attention on their patients coming to them for care. Or if they're splitting their focus, it's for good reason. But as a new Boston Globe Spotlight investigation found, in at least one instance, that wasn't the case. The Globe report details how Brigham Health partnered with a Chinese conglomerate in 2013 to build a hospital in China where very wealthy patients would pay top dollar out of pocket for high quality care. But in the end, despite nearly 400 faculty and staff from Brigham and Dana-Farber getting involved, with around 220 plus hour trips from here to China, the final hospital attracted almost no patients at all. So this past June, Brigham's contract with its overseas partner expired. It quietly scrubbed the hospital from its webpage, touting international projects. And the name of that Chinese partner, by the way, you'll likely recognize it, as you'll find out in a minute, but not for anything good. Now, as the Globe article states, few from Brigham Health are eager to talk about it. And in fact, among those who refused to speak to reporters about any of this, Dr. Elizabeth Nabel, Brigham Health's then president, Mark Davis, the former executive who led the company's international collaborations at the time, Lisa Morrissey, the former interim chief nursing officer who worked on nursing plans and training for the hospital, and several clinicians involved in the venture who apparently needed officials' approval. But for now, I'm joined by a couple of people who are willing to speak on the subject, Boston Globe reporters Deirdre Fernandes and Rebecca Ostriker, who worked on the story along with Liz Kowalczyk and Spotlight editor Patricia Wen. Congratulations to both of you, and good to see you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Rebecca, these numbers are staggering to me. It took a year for the first cancer patient to appear, and when a Globe correspondent went over to see how many of the 647 beds were filled, how many were?
Well, we heard from multiple sources that in this gigantic hospital, 647 beds, there were typically no more than 10 patients at any time. And that was over the span of the entire contract. As you mentioned, it took nearly a year for them to get up and running. And then after that, it was very slow word of mouth, getting a little bit more, but still, as we were told, not enough to sustain the hospital by any means.
Deirdre, I know people should read the whole thing, but in a nutshell, why did it fail so miserably?
Well, I think the location was the biggest issue. It's in this island province on Hainan, and it's basically this very southernmost tip of China. The people in Hainan make about $13,000 annually, and this hospital was built essentially for wealthy patients, and it was geared towards people who would fly from mainland China or Vietnam or around Asia to get care at this hospital that with the Brigham kind of training and brand on it. And in the end, nobody really came. It was hard to get to. It was located in this kind of very isolated town on the island, and people didn't show up. I mean, if some people mentioned, if you're about to get cancer care, do you want to travel by plane and then have to take a car or a train to get to the hospital?
At the time, Deirdre, staying with you, the company that I hinted at a minute ago is Evergrande, which is in the news carrying a mere $300 billion in debt, a real estate development firm over there in real trouble. Was there any indication that this company that Brigham was partnering with as far back as the beginning was a risky venture, Deirdre? Should the Brigham have known?
Well, I think the Brigham, there was indication that there were people, investors and investment people suggesting that this company, Evergrande, was using creative accounting techniques. The company actually went into lots of different things. They went into bottled water, they bought a soccer team. There was a lot of kind of buzz around it, but also these questions about how much of it was real and how much could they really sustain it. And as one investment expert kind of said, this was kind of a Ponzi scheme. They were, doing a lot. All their ventures were just a way to raise more and more money. So there was a question.
Rebecca,
Brigham said that they. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, Brigham said that they vetted the company and did some financial vetting, and they also had an outside group look at this project and this, but they wouldn't say who the outside group was or this outside firm was, and they wouldn't kind of go into much detail about what kind of vetting was done.
Rebecca, you mentioned in your piece that you and your colleagues do that MGH is a joint venture in China as well that is going well. So is the point here and the focus on the Brigham that it failed, or who it intended to provide services for? Why the focus on them?
It's a great question. I mean, both things are good questions. There are people who are questioning whether large nonprofit hospitals should be doing this kind of thing at all. Should large nonprofit hospitals be going overseas to try to help cater to wealthy people abroad if their basic mission is here at home? Both hospitals did that. One hospital opened, MGH partnered with some folks and opened a hospital in Shanghai, which is a gigantic city of more than 26 million people. That hospital is doing much better. It's located in a busy part of the city.
Sure.
There's a lot of expatriates and wealthy folks there. And if you need treatment and you're already in Shanghai, that's where you might go. I spoke with someone from Deloitte who pointed out that the feeling in that hospital is very reminiscent of what you might experience in an American hospital. But the choice that Brigham made to partner with this gigantic real estate developer who had no experience at all in healthcare, and to put it on on an island which was difficult to get to. It's embarrassing that it was a terrible failure, but there do remain questions about, just in general, whether nonprofits should be going into this.
Can we stay on that question for a second, for those who don't, to translate, nonprofit means tax exempt. And a nonprofit institution in any jurisdiction means that those of us who pay taxes make up for those who don't pay taxes. And they have chosen, in part, to their nonprofit mission to serve billionaires or attempt to serve billionaires. You combine this with an earlier spotlight story in your paper about the heads of teaching hospitals, including the same woman who led this venture, Dr. Nabel, who was on a couple of corporate boards, sold her Moderna stock for $8 million. Is there anybody, Rebecca, in the hierarchy of the Brigham that is concerned at least about the appearance of what this hospital and its leaders are doing as a nonprofit entity?
Nobody that we spoke with seemed to be concerned about it. And you raise a very good point. I mean, this is something that the Spotlight team, our colleagues, have been looking at with other stories. And you mentioned the one, something like 6 out of 7 of Boston's hospital chiefs taking on lucrative positions on corporate boards, more common in Boston with all of our wonderful hospitals than in any other major U.S. city. There was an earlier story about ethically questionable investments by Dana-Farber trustees. So there are real questions to be raised in around this. And when it comes to Brigham, no, there was as you mentioned, all the people who didn't want to talk with us. We did manage to speak with one Mass General Brigham executive about the Evergrande project briefly. But he made it clear that he had only been with Mass General Brigham since 2020, and he hadn't been involved in the development of this project, and there were a number of things that he wasn't aware of. So, they say that this is part of their efforts to improve global health. They say that the corporate ventures abroad are help support the work that they do in the local community. The problem with that
but can I stop it? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Please, jump in.
You're going to mention work in the local community. You guys list the Lown Hospital Index ranks them I can put it up here, of 3,641 hospitals nationwide. Community benefits, things like charitable spending, community investment, Medicaid revenue as a share of patient revenue. Near the bottom, 3,188. So we're running out of time, but essentially, Deirdre, can you give me 30 seconds on, has there been a response from legislators, other leaders who you didn't interview, indicating some concern? Or is this just another day at the office? Quickly, if you can.
Well, I think that's the issue, right? Like, who's watching these hospitals and whether or not they're, living up to their nonprofit kind of status? And that's an open question. And that we haven't, there's been a lot of outcry from the public. But the question is, what are legislators and the lawmakers going to do about it?
Well, we'll ask them if we can, and we hope you do too. Congratulations to you and your colleagues for yet another great piece of work. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Please be sure to join us Monday when new U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins joins me. Thanks for watching. Please stay safe.